Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. The budget has been presented and Policy Watch will discuss only the budget this week. RSTV covered the budget extensively and the response we got for our budget coverage has been tremendous, to say the least. The feedback we've got has been extremely positive, and on behalf of the whole RSTV team, I would like to thank all those who are loyal viewers of our channel. Back to business now. After a considerable gap, we have Rajesh Mahapatra on the Policy Watch set this week. Welcome back, sir, to our show. Rajesh and I will talk all things budget today. But before we do that, let's get you the headlines. Union Budget 2013-14 presented. Chidambaram cobbles together a low-cal budget, tries to trim the fat, but the focus firmly on elections next year. India to get its first ever women's-only bank. FM allots 1,000 crore in the budget for that purpose. One more price jolt for the consumer. Petrol hike for the second time in as many weeks. Opposition slams the move. A 10% surcharge on the so-called super-rich companies and individuals. Only noticeable hike in tax rates in the budget this year. Those were the headlines, and without further delay, let's get you into budget analyzing mode now. Budget 2013 had a lot of expectations. Industry is wobbling, the country is struggling with low growth, declining investment, high inflation, and an extremely worrying high fiscal deficit. It was amidst this scenario that Palaniappan Chidambaram was given the finance portfolio, and he got to work immediately. A few roadshows and some tough decisions later, it was time for the big one. How has the budget fared among such high expectation? Well, that's exactly what we will discuss today. But first, let's get you a recap of the main highlights of the budget. Take a look.
I rise to present the budget for the year 2013.
Finance Minister P. Chidambaram presented the 82nd budget of the country in Lok Sabha today. Indicating worsening public finances, the government today pegged its net borrowing for 2013-14 at 4.84 lakh crore rupees. However, despite market borrowing going up, fiscal deficit for the next financial year has been pegged at 4.8% against 5.1% estimated for 2012-13.
My greater worry is a current account deficit. The CAD continues to be high, mainly because of our excessive dependence on oil imports, the high volume of coal imports, our passion for gold, and the slowdown in exports. This year, and perhaps next year too, we have to find over $75 billion to finance the CAD.
But Chidambaram today did offer some minor sops to income taxpayers but slapped a 10% surcharge on super-rich individuals and corporates. In his tax proposals, he gave a benefit of 2,000 rupees to individual taxpayers with taxable income of up to 5 lakh rupees, but made no change in either slabs or rates of personal income tax, which will continue at 10, 20 and 30%. Chidambaram also raised the tax deduction limit for first-time home buyers by 1 lakh rupees to promote the housing sector. The move is likely to promote home ownership and give a fillip to a number of industries including steel, cement, brick, wood and glass, besides providing jobs to thousands of construction workers.
In Part A of my speech, I had referred to the tax benefit to the first home buyer who takes a loan for an amount not exceeding rupees 25 lakhs. I propose to allow such home buyers an additional deduction of interest of rupees 1 lakh to be claimed in assessment year 2014-15. If the limit is not exhausted, the balance may be claimed in assessment year 2015-16. This deduction will be over and above the deduction of rupees 1,50,000 allowed for self-occupied properties under Section 24 of the Income Tax Act.
In the midst of a major modernization drive, the Defence Ministry today got a 14% hike in its budget with a promise to provide any additional fund required for national security. Buoyed by rapid progress of the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor project, the government today said work on 2 more industrial corridors between Bangalore and Chennai and Bangalore and Mumbai have started. In a bid to encourage micro, small and medium enterprises, the Finance Minister proposed continuing non-tax benefits to these units for 3 years even after they graduate to a higher category.
Micro, small and medium enterprises have a large share of jobs, production and exports. Too many of them do not grow because of the fear of losing the benefits associated with staying small or medium. To encourage them to grow, I propose that the benefits or preferences enjoyed by them will stay with them for up to 3 years after they grow out of the category in which they obtain the benefit.
With an eye on sports, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports has been allocated 1,219 crore rupees. The Finance Minister also announced that the National Institute for Sports in Patiala will train coaches, and an amount of 250 crore rupees has been earmarked for the purpose. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
With staying small or medium.
There you go. Rajesh, you were on the panel with us that day, just before the budget speech. I spoke to you then. I remember that you put things in a very succinct way, that India had behaved like a bad, good company when times were good, when the boom was on, when times were peachy. Now it is time to behave like a good, bad company. That's what you had said. Does this budget, in your opinion, put us at least...
bad, good times company.
The bad, good times company.
Now we have to behave as a good, bad times company.
Absolutely. Do you think the budget has at least put us on that path yet? This budget?
But I would tend to say largely yes, because as I said, it's a sensible election year budget. And then there are lots of gaps, lots of questions that remain to be answered.
Right. So that's a whole recap of the thing, that perhaps it might just have put us onto that path. Now let's talk about announcements in the budget sector-wise first. In his speech, Chidambaram emphasized the need for growth. That was the first line of the budget speech, announced measures to boost the manufacturing sector. There were some measures there as well, infrastructure as well. The key announcement there was the introduction of investment allowance of 15% for capital expenses above ₹1 billion. Has he done enough for a much needed growth impetus like he put forward in this speech? Or do you think that more radical announcements were needed as far as stimulating growth is concerned?
Well, what I can say is that there is yet to be done enough by the government to stimulate growth. Whether all of that could have been done in a budget, or whether there are things that need to be done outside of the budget. There are a few things that have been done preceding in the run-up to the budget, and there are a few things that would need to be done after the budget. And whether the government would get to doing that, we'll have to wait and see. But if you are taking budget in isolation, let me first say that the budget can only do so much. And I think there were a lot of expectation and hype about this budget. And that's why when it turned out to be a good old a budget that looked had features that bearing resemblance with the marginal tinkering here and there. I mean, some people have gone up to saying that this was more of a Pranab Mukherjee style budget than a Chidambaram budget. Right. And that's where that sentiment gets expressed, that people have a lot of expectations. And they have a lot of expectations because here is a finance minister who has been seen as an industry-friendly finance minister, as a business-friendly finance minister, is a strong advocate of neoliberal policies. And here is a finance minister who has in the past done things very differently. I mean, for example, if you take the 1997-98 budget, the so-called RIM budget, I think that was a very credible, bold move on the taxation front. And I believe, moderating those tax rates to such levels, competitive levels, have in the subsequent years played a very big role in improving tax compliance.
But would you also say, because the critics of that budget say that the last budget Mr. Chidambaram presented actually started the slide, and we've got to the position that we are right now because the slide started there?
No, I don't think it is because of the tax rates. I think it is because of... No, I think there is a huge, there is a big problem that we have on the taxation front. Our tax to GDP ratio is not something that is to feel very comfortable about. And we haven't done much. We haven't accomplished much in really getting tax GDP ratio where it should be. Right. And that's not because of the tax rates. I for one, do not believe that it is because of the tax rates. I think we have got one of the most moderate tax rates
in the world.
And I think those tax rates are rates that encourage people to be tax compliant, where we have not achieved much, and that is something which really doesn't lie in the realm of the budget, but it is outside of the budget because it relates to enforcing taxation laws.
Right.
It relates to, going. Look, today we have a whole set of database. This is no longer 80s or 90s. You look at those advertisements. If you're investing more than 2 lakhs in MF mutual funds, the government gets to know about it. If you're buying a house, the government gets to know about it. If you do any high value transaction, the government gets to know about it. But what does it do with what it gets to know about it?
Right.
There is a huge disconnect.
Implementation is a problem.
It doesn't get to do anything. It cannot go after people. There is, we do not have a system of analyzing and processing this information. I think that's a huge gap that the finance minister has to address.
Right.
And he announced setting up tax administration committee.
Reform commission.
Reforms committee. Look, we have set up committees in the past. The thing is, something has to come out of it. If somebody who is, look, I mean, in the finance minister's speech, he said that I am levying a tax on the super rich. And who are the super rich? Those who have a taxable income of more than 1 crore.
Right.
And what's the number?
42,000.
42,800.
Right.
You would have several times that number of people who own BMWs and Audis in this country. Right. You are trying to tell me that those people, somebody can afford to buy a BMW if his taxable income should not be more than 1 crore?
Right.
I mean, you today in the NCR region, today you go to any metropolitan city, you do not get a 3-bed flat in the outskirts for less than 1 crore rupees.
Absolutely.
And people buy flats every second year.
Home buyers are mushrooming.
So there are tens and thousands of them out there. You need to go and go after them and get them.
Absolutely.
I think that is the biggest challenge.
Not just announcing new policies and reform commissions, but implementation and following up through. Yeah. Staying on the positives for just a bit longer.
And well, Chidambaram is the man who can actually do it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
He needs to do it.
Right. Staying on the positives of the budget for a bit, Rajesh, before we can talk about the disappointments or at least the perceived disappointments or letdowns. An additional tax exemption of I think it's a lakh rupees, is it? For the first-time home buyers. First-time home buyers, yes. Now that should encourage investment, and it's perceived that should encourage investment in the affordable housing sector. That's one. Similarly, liberalization of the Rajiv Gandhi Equity Savings Scheme. That should encourage investments in the mutual funds and stock markets as well. Moving the focus away from gold. Now, thoughts on that? Very good steps?
I think these are some positive steps in terms of encouraging household savings, because that's one segment you have to address. See, look, what has happened and what do you expect the finance minister to do in a budget? Your investment rate has come down by more than, I guess, 6 percentage points, and your domestic savings rates have fallen by about by a similar margin, account. And part of that savings has come in the government sector, part of that savings has happened in the private sector, and household savings have declined. So if you want to perk up investment, you need to perk up the domestic savings rate, because the global environment is not benign right now. Investors are not flocking to your country. So you need to look at domestic savers. I think that's a positive move so far as but remember that this is only one time. This 1 lakh rupees, you don't get it every year.
Every year, only
you
the
get
first
to
time
do
home
it,
buyers.
And I think it is in a good segment. It's in the sub 25 lakh segment, and I think that's a good move. Probably there were more expectations there. I'm quite happy that the finance minister hasn't really gone after giving more tax concessions. These are not times for giving more tax concessions.
Right.
You keep your rates moderate, and if you need to encourage savings, there are a few things like this. Yes. Fiscal instruments do make an impact, but if the ultimate objective is to getting to perk up your investment rate, I think there are a lot more direct intervention that would be required from the government.
Highly welcome as well. We'll take a small break, Rajya. We'll continue talking about the budget. We'll go into slightly more details, and there's some questions I want to ask you. We'll take a small break right now. Rajesh Mahapatra and I will be back after the break discussing more highlights of the budget. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching Policy Watch. Welcome back. The finance minister seems to have kept his macro promises on the fiscal deficit. He has taxed the rich, but only in a token way, but nothing really significant. His revenue take of 18,000 crore is not really a big blow for the economy, but this means one can't really be sure of how good his estimates are. By most accounts, and the reaction we got on budget day itself, it is a responsible budget for the simple reason that he has done little for anybody. Compared to expectations, he has delivered a low-cal, so-called low-cal budget. But as we keep hearing, and I'm going to ask this question to my guest as well, that may well better be than promising the moon and not being able to deliver. Rajesh, economists have expressed skepticism at Chidambaram's sort of rosy revenue picture assumptions, and some were quite frankly on budget day quite shocked at the sizable increase in public spending in a country it's facing the sharpest decline in growth in years now. Now, total expenditure will rise by 16% in the 2013-14 fiscal to around 16.65 trillion rupees. Are you really that surprised? I know I was while watching the speech.
As to why he has
increased spending.
Well, I mean, no. If you look at it, I think you cannot debate over that whether he needed to spend that much extra money, because what has happened, he has set aside substantive allocations for development spending, and you need that. The problem is, if you look at problem with the numbers that he has projected for 2013-14, why people are expressing skepticism, people think that he has been too ambitious on the revenue side. Now, he has projected tax revenue to grow by about close to 25%. Now, if you take out 18,000 crore that he will get in the form of additional resource mobilization because of the tax on the super rich and the changes in the excise, minor changes in excise and customs duties that he announced, even then it is a very high growth target for the tax revenue, because your growth outlook is not very well, and if you are expecting your inflation to moderate, then you may end up with a nominal growth rate of 13 to 14%, and you are expecting more than 20% of growth in tax revenue. So that's something which is suspect. Having said that, so what happens? If you look at what Mr. Chidambaram has done in 2012-13, he slashed development spending by 60,000 crore. He has done that already in 2012-13.
Before the budget? Before
the budget. And most of that those cuts have come in the form of capital spending, while he hasn't been able to do much about subsidies. In the next year, he is looking at a reduction of about 0.6 percentage point in subsidy. And most of that is to come from a reduction in oil subsidies. That is realistic and feasible, the way, you heard one round of petrol price hike came yesterday, diesel will follow soon, and I think government will go in that course of marginally raising the fuel prices. But this assumes that crude oil prices remain benign in the global market.
Nobody can really assume.
Should crude oil prices start surging again, you will have a problem. I don't think going into an election, the government can risk more fuel price hikes. They would like to be done with it now. Okay, so your subsidy calculations might go haywire if the global crude market behaves in a different way. That's one aspect. The other aspect is he has allocated significant amount for certain areas of development spending, and I think there I am quite happy the way he has focused on certain sectors. And he has tried to encourage, the RIDF, the rural infrastructure thing, because, no matter what people say in cities or in your studios, they are not going to get votes for the government. And it is an election year. So how do you do things that are politically correct and economically not wrong? I think some of the
tough
things,
line to walk.
Some of the things that he has done in that segment are some clever thinking and clever acts. And once again, then one has to actually see how they play out. They may all look good on the paper. If they do play out as they have been intended to, then what you could have a bit of boost in rural demand and rural infrastructure, and a bit of liquidity in the rural segment, and that could do well in terms of for the political imperatives facing the government, and as also I would say do well because they would be addressing the interests of a certain segment of population which otherwise gets left out.
What are the most significant assumptions by the finance minister in his speech was sorry, team. What I wanted to say, if the other assumptions don't go right, then Chidambaram may be forced through the year
to cut down on development spending.
Right, which is not something he wants to do really.
And if he doesn't do that, then there is no way the fiscal deficit target for the next year is going to be stuck to. Because,
A related question. In his speech, he said that out of the total investment needed by the country right now, around 47% he expects to come from the private sector. Now, I asked his cabinet colleagues on budget day itself, that is that really possible? Is that a too huge assumption? But they backed him to the hilt. I want to ask you this, 47% coming from the private sector, is the private sector up for it?
Of the investment?
Total investment needed.
Well, I mean, you have to put a figure to it, and it has to be ambitious. The fact of the matter that the government doesn't have money. So
they have to bank on someone.
So they have to. So it has to be. So what the government will have to do is that they have to create an enabling environment. Now, whether Mr. Chidambaram has done enough for that enabling environment to be created, whether people are going to come back and resume their investments, the big investments that probably would have been held up, that I don't think you will get a clear signal post-budget, because that you will have to wait for the Reserve Bank of India on March 19th.
To see how they respond to the budget.
How they respond. So how realistic, whether they are convinced with Mr. Chidambaram's projections on fiscal deficit front.
Right.
If the RBI governor is not convinced, and if we indeed believe that the RBI, the central bank in this country, has autonomy, enough autonomy to make its own decision, and if it really doesn't respond by cutting down rates, then probably you will see a thumbs down from the industry.
Absolutely. One more small
Should the other thing happen, then it is cheers from the industry.
One more small break on that note. We'll come back and discuss inflation and the measures he's supposed to take, or he's announced something in the budget. Don't go anywhere. More on the budget after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Economists and critics alike agree on one major thing, that the biggest failure of the UPA government has been on the inflation front. The government has a team of world-renowned economists, including Montek Singh Ahluwalia, C. Rangarajan, Raghuram Rajan, and even his predecessor, Kaushik Basu. The common complaint is that they all got it wrong on the inflation front. Rajesh, do you agree there was no concrete roadmap on how to really get inflation down to comfortable levels, or do you disagree with that in the budget?
I don't think we should have expected it from the budget. Except for what would he do? He would reduce excise duties further? No. I think inflation, the government is failing as a whole. And you very rightly said, we have some of the top economists. Maybe, who we think top economists have run out of ideas. And that's where I think it is not just budget. Even outside the budget, the government as a whole, as a collective unit, doesn't seem to have a big idea. It seems to be running out of ideas. And we all know why inflation is high. But we don't seem to be finding answers. Then how do we bring it down? What we need to do? This is not something one budget can solve. This is something which has been with us for 3 years, and we have not come up with any credible roadmap, as you said, or any credible action plan to fight it out. And we are just sort of leaving it with the hope that it would moderate. And if you go back to look at the predictions by every successive leader, be it the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister, you will see every 1 year gap, they keep saying that, by March we expect inflation to moderate. And this has been happening for the last 3 years. So I think clearly there is, that's a big failure. Yeah.
Right. Before I come to one question on the surcharge levy, that's going to be my last question. One very quick reaction on this. Should this budget, as some people say, should this have come next year? Or do you not agree with that, saying that this is a pretty responsible budget and the best he could really do under the circumstances?
No, why should it have come next year? Next year you would need a very different budget because it's going to be election year. Yeah. But because it is an election year, you would not have a budget, a vote on account. But here is my take. The thing lies in what happens after the budget. And I think the Finance Minister has been giving enough hints about it. If he manages to push through the direct tax code bill, then you would perhaps have one of the first vote on account, which is actually not a vote on account. It would actually be a full-fledged budget, because if he gets the direct tax code passed, then those tax rates become effective from 1st April 2014. And those would be the large giveaways that the middle class was waiting for.
Right. So, speaking of the middle class, one last question, Rajesh, we are running out of time. An added surcharge on local firms with incomes of more than 100 million rupees, and a 10% surcharge on individuals with annual taxable incomes of 10 million rupees. Now, like we discussed before, only 42,800 people have that right now. It only be put in for a year, a super rich tax, so to say, with a massive haircut, if you want to call it that. People call it misdirection, to let the middle class know that the UPA can go after the so-called super rich. Do you think it was misdirection? It had some tokenism in it?
No, if he follows it up by really looking into the data and if the turnout would be that, in place of 42,800, you have a much bigger number, then I think this measure was worth it.
Right,
But
right.
if you don't, if it is only those 42,800 people, then I think it's an aberration.
Right. Rajesh Mahapatra, many thanks for joining us on this post-budget analysis of the budget. That, of course, was the Deputy Executive Editor of Hindustan Times, Mr. Rajesh Mahapatra, speaking to us on what he thought of the budget. No key takeaways this week on Policy Watch. We'll let you take your pick. Is it a Robin Hood budget? Is it a responsible budget? Is it a low-calorie budget? Or was it the best budget, really, that Mr. Chidambaram could have put together under the circumstances? You take your pick. Till next week, Athar Khan saying goodbye. Good night. Thank you for watching.